brought to you by Gamivo.com. Get the cheapest game time on the market, as well as other Warcraft products. Check out the link in the description below. Hello guys, this is Doron's Movies, and today I will be talking about which expansion had the worst lore so far. Generally, I'd avoid the negativity, but with so many storylines, ones which were great and amazing, there have also been plenty that completely crashed and burned. So, without further ado, let's examine which expansion had the worst lore so far. Warcraft lore has evolved quite a lot. At this point, the franchise is, well, almost 30 years old, which is quite a lot for a video game. Personally, I started playing during Warcraft 3 primarily, although I did play Warcraft 2, and it was really the Lordaeron and the Orcish storyline that captivated me and just got me into the game. In 2004, Warcraft transitioned heavily into an MMORPG genre, and there was a massive shift for the series. In my opinion, it was a million different circumstances that really favored Blizzard that grew and expanded Warcraft so much. First, the MMORPG genre was relatively new at the time and unexplored almost completely, and gaming was really different back in 2004. There weren't really that many immersive games. Sure, there were some really excellent games at the time, but just technology was completely different and it didn't really evolve to support an amazing immersive experience. So World of Warcraft was a massive hit at the time because you suddenly had this massive virtual world. Just the concept of that was amazing at the time, with millions of people playing and this great storyline, and you can play an orc or a human or a dwarf, and that is really what drew most people in. This fact heavily impacted the lore. Warcraft originally started, as all of you know, with a very limited perspective as an RTS game, so now that there was this massive world, Blizzard really had to patch things up, make up new sides to the story, and they were constantly playing catch up. Initially, this was great. We got books like Lord of the Clans, Day of the Dragon, War of the Ancients, of Blood and Honor, and these usually just expanded upon the old storylines and gave us more depth on all these characters and all these cities and all the factions and all of the storylines of World of Warcraft. However, over time, things started getting more and more complex. We got more characters, more continents, more storylines, and most importantly, new villains. And in my opinion, the villains part is where Blizzard really started messing up, and honestly, I believe that started slowly after Wrath of the Lich King. Arthas was a regular character from Warcraft 3 that was a natural threat and just a continuation of the story. We all knew that he was still out there and that he was just growing stronger. Blizzard didn't really have to make up something crazy about him, how he is working for a different dimension and he's an entirely different entity and he was actually this guy, not that. No, they just gave us his storyline and they gave him a bit more depth and it just grew organically. After that, we had Deathwing, where in my opinion they started messing with the lore a bit more. He was an old character, so it did fit in. Mists of Pandaria was an expansion with mostly new lore. Most of the stuff was entirely brand new, and I think that was actually done right in most cases. They actually added some amazing storylines. I think the actual problems started rising when we ran out of the original characters, and now Blizzard really had to start working overtime. After MoP, we had two major enemies, the Burning Legion and the Old Gods, but since the game was an MMORPG with a living and breathing world, if we just defeated these two, what was there really left to do? Like, there was no point in actually making any new enemies that will be bigger than these guys, and I believe here lies the problem. Warlords of Draenor was, in my opinion, a step in the wrong direction. Blizzard really wanted to bring in the original Warcraft feel with the orcs and the humans, but as they couldn't really do it in any other way, they decided to include the alternate universes and time travel, which was incredibly confusing at the time, and it still really is. Honestly, I believe it was the worst expansion so far, as that is when Blizzard really started slacking. I feel like they kind of abandoned this idea halfway through and they decided to just transform it into Legion. There were so many characters and storylines that were completely rushed or just went absolutely nowhere, and today, aside from a little mention of the alternate Draenor and Battle for Azeroth, that entire world is completely irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. The biggest change to the lore consistency, in my opinion, was the release of Warcraft Chronicle in 2016. This is when things got really interesting and kind of worrying at the same time for people that were following the lore for almost 2 decades, the entire storyline drastically changed, and like half the original story was retconned or slightly altered, and some parts weren't even covered at all. In my opinion, this was cool, as it felt like it gave it a lot more depth, and now there were these bigger evils out there like the Warlords, and the threats like the Old Gods and the Legion weren't really that bad after all, and this gave Blizzard a lot more leeway and a lot more room to work with, but I think they completely wasted this potential, at least thus far. Legion, in my opinion, was decent overall, but I hated 2 things about it. First, the alternate universe Gul'dan, that was completely confusing. We have 2 Gul'dans for the alternate universe, but he's returning to the main universe, and the Legion that transcends timelines, and honestly, the ending, us defeating the Legion in one single patch, going to the main base and imprisoning Sargeras, really disappointed me. Kill Jaden and all these demon lords defeated by us players that are suddenly godlike, and the entire Argus, the stronghold, the biggest base of the Burning Legion, this massive, insanely powerful force that we essentially demolished in one single patch. Now, Battle for Azeroth had a ton of potential, and lore-wise, I believe Blizzard actually did a lot of things right. The Kultiras and the Zandalari storyline was cool, it gave us more depth and we revisited the old lore, but ultimately the ending of the expansion is what ruined it for me. There was like the Siege of Orgrimmar Part 2, it didn't really go the exact same way, but we kinda went in the same direction, and of course, Zod and his defeat was just completely terrible, honestly, and the entire storyline around Azerite and us being the children of Azeroth was really cheesy and, in my opinion, just bad writing. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the Sylvanas storyline, but the Shadowlands seems promising, so they could still kinda pull something out of that story. So, looking back at it, in my opinion, the lore started really getting slightly problematic post-Return of the Lich King, but it got really problematic after Mists of Pandaria. Honestly, every expansion since had more or less really big and glaring issues, either with consistency, retcons, or just overall cheap and bad writing. However, one expansion that overall had a bad storyline and not many redeeming qualities was, in my opinion, Warlords of Draenor. There really wasn't that much that you could say that was amazing about Warlords of Draenor. From the start it was confusing, and while the Iron Horde and us visiting the old Draenor was cool and it seemed promising and exciting, these guys were just like beaten like it was nothing. The Iron Horde, suddenly Legion showed up, they were fighting with us, we freed them, and it was happily ever after. There were all of these old characters, all these new mysteries, maybe there's something hiding here and hiding there, and it was like completely abandoned, no one cares. And until recently with the Megar and the Lightforged Draenei, there was literally no mention of Draenor, no one really cared about Draenor at all, and it still kinda is the same way for it. So overall, I want to say that I was heavily disappointed with lore, mainly in the past 4 or 5 years, but overall I'm still optimistic. There were some redeeming qualities with Legion and Battle for Azeroth. It wasn't completely bad. There was a lot of potential that they could use to create something amazing once again, and Shadowlands does seem promising once you follow all the storylines. So I really hope Blizzard steps up their fighting game in Shadowlands and brings us an excellent storyline that will be much more similar to that original Warcraft 3 and just the overall Warcraft franchise feel. Thank you for watching. Check out what is going on with Defiance Brotherhood by clicking on the screen, and check out the second channel, Doran's Academy, for videos on real world history and science. See you next time.